Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
Battle of Malvern Hill, also known as the Battle of Poindexter's Farm. July 1st, 1862 was the battle. It was the final battle of the 7 days battles, taking place on a 130-foot elevation of land known as Malvern Hill,
right
near the Confederate capital of Richmond.
Yeah, man, they're like right there.
Just 1 mile from the James River. Including inactive reserves, more than 50,000 soldiers from each side took part, using more than 200 pieces of artillery and 3 warships.
Wow.
General Lee attacked the Union Army at the Battle of Savage Station on the 29th of June and the battles of Glendale and White Oak Swamp on the 30th.
Right.
All 3 of these battles inconclusive.
I'd say the Union probably made out better than the Confederates in these.
Right. After this series of conflicts that inflicted thousands of casualties in both armies, McClellan began to assemble his forces in an imposing natural position atop Malvern Hill.
Well, at Malvern Hill, a plateau-like elevation in Henrico County provided an impressive natural military position about 2 miles north of the James River.
Right.
The hill rose 130 feet, like we said, to its crest to form a crescent about a mile and a half in length and 3/4 of a mile wide. Its slope was about 1 mile in length and very gradual, with 1 or 2 notable depressions.
Okay.
Along with the western side of the hill ran Malvern Cliffs, a bluff-like formation that overlooked Turkey Run,
Sweet.
a tributary of a nearby Turkey Island Creek.
Oh, makes sense.
Western Run was another tributary of Turkey Island Creek, which lay mostly along the eastern side of the hill and slanted slightly into the northern side. Hope you guys are taking notes. Please, somebody draw this out for us.
And Western Run is on the eastern side of the hill.
Right. One depression dipped some 60 feet. Whoa. At the valley of the Western Run and slanted upwards towards the plateau.
Okay, so it's a nice little geographic area over here.
Malvern's hill center was slightly lower than the flanks. The gentle bare slant meant that any assailing army could not easily take cover, right? And artillery would have the benefit of a clear, open field. So ain't nobody coming up on that hill. It'd be fucked, dude.
Right. You'd be stupid. Several farms were positioned near Malvern Hill. Roughly 1,200 yards north of the hill were the Poindexter and Carter farms. Between the 2 farms was a swampy and thickly wooded area that made up, of course, of Western Run. The largest in the area was the Mellert family's farm, usually called the Crew Farm for a former owner, situated at the western side of the hill.
Okay.
About 1/4 mile due east of Malvern Hill was the West Farm. Whatever, I guess we're just... Between these 2 farms lay the Willis Church Road, which some locals called the Quaker Road.
That's going to come into play.
This road also ran past the Malvern House, the hill's namesake, which was perched atop the southern edge of the plateau.
Okay.
Historian Douglas Southall Freeman says it was altogether an exceedingly formidable position. Had the Union engineers searched the whole countryside below Richmond, they could not found ground more ideally set for the slaughter of an attacking army.
All right.
Which is true.
Stay there, man.
Which is true. Look at that.
Right.
I mean,
So that's open.
murder.
Wow.
It's murder. It's a gentle slope.
A few days prior to the action on Malvern Hill, McClellan incorrectly believed the Army of the Potomac was vastly outnumbered by its Confederate foe because McClellan's an idiot. And his fear of being cut off from a supply depot left him cautious and wary.
Right.
Night of June 28th, McClellan told his generals he intended to move his army to a position on the north bank of the James River called Harrison's Landing, where they would be protected by Union gunboats. The Army of the Potomac came to Malvern Hill, the Army's final stop before reaching the landing, with approximately 54,000 men.
Dang. On the morning of 30th of June, 1862, the Union's 5th Corps under Fitz John Porter, a part of McClellan's Army of the Potomac, amassed atop Malvern Hill. Colonel Henry Hunt, McClellan's skilled chief of artillery, posted 171 guns on the hill and 91 more in reserve in the south. The artillery line on the hill slope consisted of 8 batteries of field artillery with 37 guns. Wow. I mean, geez, I don't even need no infantry.
Nope.
Brigadier General George Sykes' division would guard the line. In reserve were additional field artillery and 3 batteries of heavy artillery, which included 5 4.5-inch Rodman guns, 5 20-pounder Parrott rifles, and 6 32-pounder howitzers. As more McClellan's forces arrived at the hill, Porter continued to reinforce the Union line. Brigadier General George Morrell's units, stationed between the Crew and West Farms, extended the line to the northeastern section. Brigadier General Darius Couch's division of the 4 Corps, as yet unbloodied by the skirmishes of the 7 days, further extended the northeastern lines. These guys are the freshest. This left 17,800 soldiers from Couch's and Morrill's division at the northern face of the hill, overlooking the Quaker Road, from which the Federals expected Lee's forces to attack.
Oh, and he intended to.
Mhm.
Early the next day, which was Tuesday, July 1st, McClellan, having come from nearby Hacksaw's Landing the night before, examined his army's battle line on Malvern Hill. His inspection left him worried most about the Union Army's right, which was the eastern flank, which lay behind Western Run. Western Run was an area necessary for McClellan's plans to relocate to Harrison's Landing, and he feared an attack might come from there.
Right.
As a result, he posted the largest portion of his army,
Oh, shit.
2 divisions from Edwin Sumner's 2nd Corps, 2 divisions from Brigadier General Samuel P. Heintzelman's 3rd Corps, 2 divisions from Brigadier General William Franklin's 6th Corps, and 1 division from Major General Erasmus Keyes' 4th Corps, who were stationed across the James.
Okay.
Division under Brigadier General George McCall badly mangled in the fighting at Glendale, and having lost McCall, remember he went out looking for something, they captured him, and 2 of its 3 brigadiers was held in general reserve. So you guys just hold on back.
McClellan did not believe his army was ready for a battle and hoped Lee would not give them one. He's like, maybe he's not coming after us.
I hope he doesn't.
Just let us go.
I hope he doesn't.
Nonetheless, he left his troops at Malvern Hill and traveled downstream aboard the
Of course he
ironclad.
did, because that's what he does.
Right. And he got on the USS Galena to inspect his army's future resting place at Harrison's Landing. McClellan did not delegate an interim commander. Didn't he do this before?
Yep.
Porter, who was the commander during an initial attack, became the de facto leader on the Union side of the battle. So he gets like, I guess it's me, guys.
McClellan's an idiot.
Yes.
With around 55,000 soldiers, the Army of Northern Virginia was about evenly matched with the Federals, and with Lee at the helm, notably more aggressive.
Damn
Right?
right.
He wanted a final, decisive attack that would effectively scatter the Federals.
That's what he wanted.
Several pieces of evidence, which was abandoned commissary stores, wagons and arms, and hundreds of Union stragglers and deserters his units had happened upon and captured, led Lee to conclude that the Army of the Potomac was demoralized and retreating.
Right, which they were trying to.
And all the battles up to Malvern Hill, Lee's plans to destroy the Federal Army had failed for one reason or another, Jackson. Though he was undeterred, his chances for decisive victory were diminishing quickly.
They were. He got to get that shit done now.
He wanted to completely annihilate him, too, though.
Early on, July 1st, Lee met with his lieutenants, including Major Generals James Longstreet, A.P. Hill, and Stonewall Jackson. John Magruder and D.H. Hill as well. D.H. Hill, after talking with Chaplain familiar with the geography of Malvern Hill, there's a lot of freaking hills.
Well, Melbourne's the one.
Right. The chaplain,
Well, the 2 guys, too.
the chaplain cautioned against mounting an attack.
Right.
He's like, if General McClellan is there in strength, he'd better let him alone.
They're like, we don't stand a chance if they're up there on that.
That's what D.H. Hill said. Yeah, he said, we better let them alone if McClellan is up there. Longstreet laughed off Hill's objection, saying, don't be scared. Now that we got him, now that we got McClellan whipped. Well, Lee chose the relatively well-rested commands of D.H. Hill, Stonewall Jackson, and John Magruder. Damn right, Stonewall Jackson's well-rested.
Well-rested.
And some bitch is still chewing on a biscuit from last night. And John Magruder to lead a Confederate offense, as they had barely participated in the fighting the day before.
Yeah, well, James Longstreet and A.P. Hill's divisions were held in reserve as they were in no condition to fight after Glendale, with almost half their officers and close to a quarter of the enlisted men killed or wounded.
Right.
Brigadier General Winfield Featherston's brigade was temporarily commanded by Brigadier General George B. Anderson of D.H. Hill's division, as there was nobody left in the brigade above the rank of major.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they all got annihilated. According to Lee's plan, the Army of Northern Virginia would form a semicircle enveloping Malvern Hill. D.H. Hill's 5 brigades would be placed along the northern face of the hill, forming the center of the Confederate line, and the commands of Jackson and Magruder would take the left and right flanks, respectively.
Okay.
All right, well, they got a plan. Can they make it up that hill, though?
That's the problem. Whiting's forces would position themselves on the Poindexter farm, with the outfits of Brigadier General Charles Sidney Winder and Richard Ewell nearby. The infantry of these 3 detachments would provide reinforcement for the Confederate line if necessary. 2 veteran generals rejoined the Army of Northern Virginia for the battle, Brigadier General Wade Hampton and Brigadier General Jubal Early, both wounded 2 months earlier. Yeah. They're like, I'm ready, boys. Hampton and Early were given command of 2 of Jackson's brigades, which had lost their commanders at Gaines Mill and had only inexperienced colonels to lead them. Well, that's cool. Okay. Major General Theo Holmes would take up a position on the extreme Confederate right flank.
All right, extreme. The Army of the Potomac's disposition in the lead up to the battle was more orderly than Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. All of McClellan's forces would be concentrated in one place, save for Erasmus Keyes and one of his 2 divisions, which were stationed across the James River.
All right.
Confederate scout observed Union soldiers resting in position and moving about the hill unworried, whilst the disposition of the cannons around the hill slope gave him the impression that the position was almost impregnable, which it was. McClellan's army was on the hill in force. They said, come and take it, baby.
First, Magruder's units were behind Stonewall Jackson's column while marching down the Long Bridge Road, which led to Malvern Hill. Along this road were several adjoining pathways, one of which road, called the Willis Church Road by some locals and Quaker Road by others, led south from Glendale to Malvern Hill. General Lee's maps labeled this Quaker Road. Another of these paths began near a local farm and angled southwest toward an upriver point on the River Road. Some locals called this the Quaker Road. Okay, so we don't know which road is what, huh? Including Magruder's guides, who led Magruder's army down this road rather than the Quaker Road shown on Lee's map. Oh, okay, here. So he went down the wrong Quaker Road. Damn. General Longstreet eventually rode after Magruder and persuaded him to reverse course. He's like, no, dude, I'm going this way. He's like, no, man, trust me, it's this way. He's like, no, this is Quaker freaking Road.
So what's this?
This incident delayed Magruder's arrival to the battlefield for 3 hours.
Huger, worried about clashing with Union forces while marching towards Malvern Hill, had also failed to manage his division effectively.
Of course.
He deployed 2 of his brigades, commanded by Brigadier Generals Lewis Armistead and Ambrose Wright, to perform a flanking maneuver around any Federals they found to avoid the Union threat.
Okay.
Longstreet eventually notified Huger that he would be unobstructed by Federal forces if he marched to Malvern Hill. Yeah, because they're already on the hill.
Right.
Huger, however, remained in place until someone from Lee's headquarters came to guide them to the battlefield. He said, I ain't listening to you, Longstreet.
Longstreet's credible. You should have listened to him.
I should have.
As noon drew, with no sight of either Huger or Magruder, who were supposed to be the manning of the Confederate right flank, Lee replaced...
Lee's like, dude, can I get anybody that shows up on time?
Right. Lee replaced these 2 forces with smaller units of Brigadier Generals Armistead and Wright, 2 of Huger's brigades that had reached the battlefield some time earlier. Huger and his other 2 brigades under Brigadier General Ransom and Mahone were still too far north of the scene. Despite the mishaps of disunity, Malvern Hill would be the first time during the 7 days battle that Lee managed to concentrate his force.
Colonel Robert H. Chilton sent a draft to commanders on July 1st, 1862, about 1:30 p.m. He says, batteries have been established to rake the enemy's line. If broken, as is probable, Armistead, who can witness the effect of the fire, has been ordered to charge with a yell. Do the same. Well, Lee surveyed the left flank for himself for possible artillery positions. After a reconnoitering expedition on the right flank, James Longstreet returned to Lee. The 2 compared their results and concluded that the 2 grand battery-like positions would be established at the left and right sides of Malvern Hill.
Okay.
The convergent artillery fire from the batteries, they reasoned, could weaken the Union line so a Confederate infantry attack could break through. If this plan did not work out, Lee and Longstreet felt the artillery fire would buy them time to consider other plans.
Right. It would. Kind of.
Maybe.
With the battle plan in order, Lee sent a draft to his lieutenants, written by his chief of staff, Colonel Robert Clifton. No, Colonel Robert Chilton. I wonder if the guy from the Chilton automobile books.
I thought the same.
The orders were not well crafted, however, since they designated the yellow of a single charging brigade as the only signal attack for a full 15 brigades. Oh, geez. The yell.
Right.
Not yellow. Amid the tumult and clamor of battle, this was bound to create confusion, obviously. Moreover, Chilton's draft effectively left the attack solely at the discretion of Lewis Armistead, who had never before held command of a brigade during battle. The draft also did not note the time it had been written, which later caused confusion by Magruder.
Wow.
Jeez, oh, Pete.
Well, beginning 1 p.m., Union artillery fired first, initially upon infantry in the woods, and later upon any Confederate artillery that attempted to move into firing position.
Right.
On Confederate left flank, 2 batteries from Whiting's division and 1 from Jackson soon began firing from their position upon Darius Couch's division of the 4th Corps, who were near the center of the Union line.
Okay.
This began a fierce firefight with the Union's 8 batteries and 37 guns concentrated against 3 Confederate batteries and 16 guns.
Oh, wow.
The Union fire silenced the Rowan artillery of the Confederates and made their position untenable. The 2 other Confederate batteries placed by Jackson himself were in somewhat better positions and managed to keep firing.
All right, sweet. Jackson. Well rested and...
Right. Biscuit. Stomach's all full.
Yeah, he's coherent for a little while. Over a period of time, about 3 hours, a total of 6 or 8 Confederate batteries engaged the Union Army from the Confederate left flank. But they were usually engaged only one at a time.
Well, that's not going to do nothing.
On the Confederate right flank, a total of 6 batteries engaged the Federals, but they did so one by one instead of unison. And each was consecutively cut to pieces by concentrated Union artillery fire. Moreover, they engaged the Union artillery later than the guns of the left flank, so the desired crossfire bombardment was never achieved.
Right. You only got one coming from one side. I mean,
come on, what the hell was going on?
In all, the Confederate artillery barrage on both flanks completely failed to achieve its objectives.
Of course it did.
Confederate fire did manage to kill Captain John E. Beam of the Union's 1st New Jersey Artillery, along with a few others and several Federal batteries, although none that were actually engaged had to move to avoid the fire.
All right.
Although the barrage by Lee's forces did claim a few lives, Union forces remained unfazed and continued their fearsome barrage.
Yeah, right.
Union Army Lieutenant Charles B. Hayden supposedly fell asleep during the artillery fight. Wow. He said, I think I'm comfortable here.
That's crazy. How the hell?
I don't know. On both the left and right flanks, several of the batteries that did engage lasted no more than minutes before being rendered incapable of fire.
Right.
Moreover, in a failure of command that, according to historian Thomas M. Settles, must ultimately be placed on Lee's shoulders, the movements of the two flanks were never coordinated with each other.
Stupid.
D.H. Hill found the failure of the Confederate artillery discouraging and later dismissed the barrage as most farcical.
All right, it's ridiculous.
He's like, dude, screw this army.
Right. Meanwhile, the Union artillery fire was planned and directed nearly flawlessly.
Right.
As historian Jennings Cropper Wise notes, Colonel Hunt McClellan's chief of artillery continuously refocused Union fire on various fronts in an enormous chaff of fire of more than 50 superior pieces, disabling 4 of Huger's and several of Jackson's batteries almost the instant they came into action.
Mm-hmm.
This severely hampered the Confederates' ability to respond effectively to the Federal barrage. The Union artillery subdued a number of Southerners' batteries. Those few that remained attacked piecemeal and failed to produce any significant result.
Yeah, well, DHL told you guys not to do it in the first place. Tense Confederate and especially Union artillery fire continued for at least an hour, slackening at about 2:30 p.m. At about 3:30 p.m., Lewis Armistead noticed Union skirmishers creeping towards his men where the Grand Battery on the Confederate right flank was, nearly within rifle range. Armistead sent 3 regiments from his command, which was about half of his brigade, to push back the skirmishers, thus beginning the infantry part of the battle.
Right.
Skirmishers were repelled quickly, but Armistead's men found themselves in the midst of an intense Union barrage.
Oh, shit.
The Confederates decided to nestle themselves in a ravine along the hill's slant. This position protected them from the fire, but pinned them down on the slopes of the hill.
They did.
Unsupported by either infantry or artillery.
Oh, jeez.
They did not have enough men to advance any further, and retreating would have put them back into the crossfire. So they're stuck.
Right there. Not long after the advance of Armistead's regiment, John Magruder and his men arrived near the
Hey, look at you, Magruder.
Albeit quite late because of the confusion regarding the names of the local roads.
Right.
By this time, it was 4 o'clock p.m. Magruder was told at that morning's war council to move to Huger's right, but he was unaware of Huger's position and sent Major Joseph L. Brent to locate Huger's right flank. Brent found Huger, who said he had no idea where his brigades were. I don't know, but
I have no idea.
Huger was noticeably upset that his men had been given orders by someone other than himself.
Right.
Lee had told Huger's 2 brigades under Armistead and Ambrose Wright to advance to the right of the Confederate line.
Oh, well, Lee did it himself, so you can't do nothing about that, Huger.
Upon hearing this, Magruder was quite confused.
What the hell, man?
He sent Captain A.G. Dickinson to find Lee and inform him of the successful charge Armistead's men and request further orders.
Successful, yeah. Contrary to this message, Armistead was in fact pinned down halfway up Malvern Hill. At the same time, Whiting sent Lee in an incorrect report that Union forces were retreating. Not yet.
Man.
Whiting had mistaken 2 events for a Federal withdrawal. One was the movement of Edwin Sumner's troops, who were adjusting their position to avoid the Confederate fire. And the other was the relaxing of Union fire on his side, which was actually the Union artillery concentrating their firepower to a different front. You didn't notice they were firing somewhere else?
Right, idiots.
Whiting and Magruder's erroneous reports led Lee to send a draft of orders to Magruder via Dickinson. He says, General Lee expects you to advance rapidly. Dickinson says that Lee says it is reported that the enemy is retreating. Press forward your whole line and follow up Armistead's success. What success?
All right.
Before Dickinson returned with these orders, Magruder was belatedly handed the order sent out 3 hours previously by Chilton. Oh, geez. Since no time was affixed to the text of the orders, Magruder was unaware that these orders had been rendered meaningless by the failure of the Confederate artillery during the past few hours.
My goodness.
And he believed he had received 2 successive orders from Lee to attack.
Oh, my. Here we go. Believing himself bound by Lee's order to charge, but with his own brigades not yet in attacking position. Magruder mustered some 5,000 men from Huger's brigades, including those of Ambrose Wright and Major General William Mahone, and half of the men for Armistead's brigade, who were caught in the open battlefield. Magruder had also sent for Brigadier General Robert Ransom Jr., also under Huger's command, who noted that he had been given strict instructions to ignore any orders not originating from Huger.
Cool.
And apologetically said he could not help Magruder. Sorry, bud.
Right.
Magruder additionally ordered men under his personal command. 3 regiments of Brigadier General Howell Cobb's brigade, plus Colonel William Barksdale's full brigade, to attack. Because of confusion regarding Quaker Road, however, these brigades were not yet near enough to do more than move into supporting position, and Magruder wanted to attack immediately.
That ain't happening, Magruder.
Jeez.
Despite this, under Magruder's order at about 5:30 p.m., Wright's brigade with Armistead's, then Mahone's brigade, started darting out of the woods and towards the Union line.
Oh, shit.
The artillery of the Confederate left flank under Jackson's personal command also renewed their barrage with the late arrival of 2 batteries of Richard Ewell's division.
Okay.
The Confederates were initially engaged solely by Union sharpshooters, but the latter quickly fell back to give their own artillery a clear field of fire.
Right.
Yeah. Anti-personnel canister shot was employed with deadly effect. Wright's men were pinned down in a small depression on the rolling hillside to the right of Armistead's. Mahone's were driven back into retreat in about the same area.
Oh, jeez.
At some point during the first wave of assaults, Cobb moved into close supporting position behind Armistead, and Barksdale's men were also supporting the left of Armistead.
Jeez, old Pete, man. These guys.
What a shit show.
Man, the firefight also alerted 3 Union boats on the James River, the ironclad USS Galena and the gunboats USS Jacob Bell and USS Aroostook, which began lobbing missiles 20 inches in length and 8 inches in diameter from the position on James River onto the battlefield. Oh, jeez, OP. The explosions and impacts of the gunboat fire impressed the Confederate troops. Like, dang,
Man, that's impressive.
That's nice. You guys got any more their blue uniforms? But the gun's aim was unreliable, and the large shells did considerably less damage than might have expected.
Hey, man, still kind of spooked them a little bit, maybe.
Right.
D.H. Hill had been discouraged by the failure of the Confederate artillery and asked Stonewall Jackson to supplement Chilton's draft. Jackson's response was that Hill should obey their original orders, charge with a yell after Armistead's brigade. No yell was heard for hours, and Hill's men began building shelters to sleep in. Around 6 p.m., Hill and his 5 brigade commanders had assumed that the lack of a signal meant their army would not attempt any assault that night.
Wow.
They were conferring together about Chilton's order when they heard yells and the commotion of a charge from their right flank, roughly where Armistead was supposed to be. Hill took the yell as a signal and shouted to his commanders, "That must be the general advance. Bring up your brigades as soon as possible and join in on it." D.H. Hill's 5 brigades with some 8,200 men had to contend with these dense woodlands around the Quaker Road and Western Run, which destroyed any order they may have had.
Oh, my. That's so stupid. What the freak is going on here? Men advanced out of the woods towards the Union line in 5 separate uncoordinated attacks, and each brigade charged up the hill alone. Jeez, OP. Wow. William Calder of the 2nd Regiment North Carolina Infantry wrote, "We crossed one fence, went through another piece of woods, then another fence, into an open field on the other side, of which was a long line of Yankees."
Wow.
He says, "Our men charged gallantly at them. The enemy mowed us down by the 50s. Jeez, oh Pete. Some brigades in Hill's division made it close enough to exchange musket fire and engage in hand-to-hand combat, but these were driven back. The artillery response on the Federal side to Hill's charge was particularly withering, and soon Hill's men needed support just to hold their ground. In Extraordinary Circumstances, The 7 Days Battle, a book by Brian K. Burton, called Hill's charge unnecessary and costly. The successive assaults of Hill's brigades on the well-entrenched Federals were short-lived and achieved a little.
Yeah, but it did.
That's so sad.
Preceding attacks by Lee's army had done barely anything to accomplish Confederate objectives, but this did not deter Magruder, who rode back and forth across the battlefield, calling for reinforcements and personally launching unit after unit into a charge of the Union line.
Right.
Why? It's not working.
I know, but shit, you got to do something.
At this point, men who had always been under direct control of Magruder's command began to join the battle. And then Magruder first encountered some units of the Brigadier General Robert Toombs, who was a Confederate. With Toombs' brigade widely dispersed, the individual units of Magruder found were not with Toombs himself. Magruder personally led the men in a short-lived charge, followed by a disordered retreat. Jeez. Other units nominally under Toombs' command appeared, charged, and retreated at various times throughout the next few hours with little or no organization.
Jeez, oh Pete.
The brigades of Colonel George T. Anderson and Colonel William Barksdale emerged from the woods to the right of Toombs, but as they did so, Anderson's men also became separated as the left side outpaced the right. Oh, geez, you got to move in unison, guys. Holy shit.
Oh, this created an advance with 2 of Anderson's regiments on the far Confederate left, next to Toombs, Barksdale's men in the middle, and 3 more Anderson regiments on the right, near the remnants of Wright and Mahone. Anderson's right flank charged, but made it no farther than the foot at the hill before breaking and retreating under a hail of gunfire from the artillery. Anderson's left flank never charged.
I said, nope.
Barksdale's brigade charged at roughly the same time, and it made considerably farther up the hill, engaged in Union infantry of Brigadier General Daniel Butterfield in a firefight that lasted more than an hour.
Hey.
Hey, look at these guys. Lee received Magruder's calls for reinforcement and instructed Huger to let Ransom go support the men trapped on the battlefield.
He also sent orders to the brigades of Brigadier Generals Joseph B. Kershaw and Paul Jones Semis and Major General Lafayette McClaw's division within Magruder's command. Okay. Robert Ransom's unit, after they finally showed up with Huger's permission, first attempted to charge straight up the hill, following the path of other Confederate brigades attempting to aid Magruder. When this proved useless, Ransom ordered them to regroup in the woods to the Confederate right, march double time half a mile and a hook to the right, around all other Confederate units, and attack the far Union western flank. So
Okay.
he's like, while Ransom was angling west, Jackson responded to a request for reinforcement from D.H. Hill by sending forward brigades from his own command to move from the east into the area where Hill had attacked. Moving all his men around, trying to see if they can get something going, but
Let's see here.
how about you just give up? Nobody's making it up that hill.
All right. From his own division, Stonewall sent Brigadier Generals Alexander Lawton and Charles S. Winder. And from Ewell's division, Brigadier General Isaac R. Trimble and Colonels Leroy A. Stafford and Jubal Early. Brigadier General John R. Jones was wounded in the hand, and command of his brigade went to Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cunningham of the 48th Virginia.
Hey, Richie Cunningham. Why? Just he was wounded in the hand?
Right. Like, he can't command an army. Which Cunningham commanded the brigade a few days earlier while Jones was on sick leave. Oh, jeez. On sick. Who gets sick leave in the army?
Apparently a colonel.
I guess. Ransom's men managed to come closer to the Union line than any Confederates that day, guided by flashing light of the cannons amidst an encroaching darkness. However, George Sykes' artillery repelled that attack, as he has the other ones. The brigades of Kershaw and Semmes, sent earlier by Lee, arrived to the front while Ransom was moving to attack in another position. Semmes and Kershaw were quickly sent in. They, too, were sent back packing, not long after attacking. Man, nobody can, perfect position for the Union.
Federal, man. They could have just sat there the whole time.
Yeah.
Semmes was west of the junction of Carter's Mill Road and Willis Church Road in the vicinity of Barksdale, Mahone, and Wright. Semmes made the final charge of the day west of these roads, and like the charges before, it was to little effect.
Right.
Kershaw angled east in the area where Toombs, Anderson, and Cobb had attacked. This was an area of great confusion. Kershaw's troop arrived ahead of all the reinforcements sent by Jackson and took fire from both friendly and hostile forces. From Confederates behind them firing wildly and Federals in front firing effectively.
Yes.
That's it. Kershaw's men retreated en route.
I guess they did.
The brigades behind Kershaw charged incoherently, with some men pushing forward and others getting separated from their units or confused when they encountered groups of retreating Confederates. Disorganized, retreating soldiers from various units were so numerous they slowed Jackson's men to nearly a standstill.
So fucking stupid, I swear. It's the dumbest shit in the world. Jackson's unit commanders attempted to organize the various regiments and rally the retreaters to join in.
No.
But it was all very
like,
little effect.
No, have you been up there?
They're like, not doing it, bud. A few units fought fiercely against Union infantry and artillery. That's it, just a few fierce battles. In particular, 3 regiments of Barlow's brigade made it close enough to Union lines to engage hand-to-hand combat with troops of Brigadier General Daniel Sickles before being driven back, as usual. As the sun started to go down, Brigadier General Isaac Trimble began to move his brigade forward. Stonewall asked him what he was planning to do, and Trimble said, "I'm going to charge those batteries, soy." Jackson replied, "I guess you better not try it. General D.H. Hill has just tried it with his entire division and been repulsed. I guess you better not try it."
I guess you better not try it. Well, night was falling, and eventually all these troops were ordered to merely hold their positions without charging. In the end, the charges of Semmes and Kershaw were the last coherent Confederate actions, and neither was successful. Brigadier General Porter summed up the Confederate infantry charges at Malvern Hill this way. He says, as if moved by a reckless disregard of life equal to that displayed at Gaines Mill, with a determination to capture our army or destroy it by driving us into the river.
Right. It's like they didn't care if they're going to just murder a bunch of people.
Brigade after brigade rushed at our batteries, but the artillery of both Morrell and Couch mowed them down with shrapnel, grape, and canister, while our infantry, withholding their fire until the enemy were in short range, scattered the remnants of their columns, sometimes following them up and capturing their prisoners and their colors.
Oh, wow.
With the infantry part of the battle over, Union artillery continued to boom across the hill. They stopped firing about 8:30 p.m., leaving a wreath of smoke upon the crest's edge and ending the action at Malvern.
Jeez, OP.
Yeah, fucking Confederates just didn't get it done, man.
The human toll of the Battle of Malvern Hill and the 7 days battles was shown clearly as both capitals, Washington and Richmond, set up numerous provisional hospitals to care for the dead, wounded, and missing. Ships sailed from the peninsula to Washington, carrying the wounded. Richmond was nearest to the battlefields of the 7 days, and the immense number of casualties overwhelmed hospitals and doctors. People from the Confederacy descended upon Richmond to care for the conflict's casualties. Graves could not be dug quickly enough. The Confederates counted some 5,650 casualties. Some 30,000 Confederates engaged that day, though several thousand were endured the Union shelling. Jeez, OP. Whiting's unit suffered 175 casualties in Malvern Hill, even though they had limited involvement in the assaults. Jeez.
They were just shelling everybody, dude. Well, Charles Winder's brigade of just over 1,000 men suffered 104 casualties. That's 10% in their short involvement in the battle. D.H. Hill spent days removing the wounded, burying the dead, and cleaning up the battlefield with help from Magruder and Huger's units. One of D.H. Hill's brigades lost 41% of its strength at Malvern Hill alone. He later estimated that more than half of all the Confederate killed and wounded at Malvern Hill was the result of artillery.
No shit.
2 Confederate generals were wounded, Brigadier General George B. Anderson and John R. Jones. No Union officers above the regimental level were killed or wounded.
Those guys were just sitting up there just enjoying what they were doing.
Right. Falling asleep.
Jeez, OP. Well, the Battle of Malvern Hill was a resounding Union tactical victory.
It was.
The victory was due in no small part to Henry Hunt, the Union chief artillerist, who did proficient work in accumulating and concentrating the Union guns on the Confederate forces. Troop placement before the battle by the Army's principal topographical engineer, whatever.
Engineer. Yeah, you see. He focused on all the red edges. Engineer.
Engineer. Colonel A.A. Humphreys was also carried out capably.
Cool.
The ground on Malvern Hill was used effectively, and the Union line had depth with a healthy amount of rested troops available to defend.
Right, so why don't they just stay there?
Fitz John Porter, the de facto commander for the day,
Fuck you, McClellan,
played an important role in this. He posted his men well on the 30th of June and stationed reinforcements near the Union line. Darius Couch, whose forces comprised half of the Union center, positioned his reinforcements skillfully, as well as cooperated with George Morrell, whose units formed the other part of the Union middle. I mean, these guys are all
in sync.
All in sync and ready,
gelling together.
Players, they bought into the freaking scheme and ready to roll, baby.
Well, the infantrymen performed well also. As Brian K. Burton notes, they stayed behind the guns most of the time and did not advance too far during counter charges. Yeah, they knew how far to go so that the artillery could keep firing while they're doing their business. Right. This behavior allowed the gunners a clear field of fire. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Furthermore, if more of anything was needed, infantry or artillery, it was available. At the forefront of the Union victory, however, was the overwhelming firepower of their artillery. Of course. As later accounts by soldiers from both armies repeatedly attested. Number of shortcomings in planning and execution contributed to the debacle suffered by the Confederates. The Confederate brigade leaders performed well, with the exception of a few minor instances. Burton surmises that the blame of July 1st must lie with the overall commanders. Longstreet was overconfident about the artillery strategy, which proved less effective than it could have been, largely because of problems gathering the artillery for the assault. Yeah, whatever. Let's call it out who it really was.
Jeez, Pete. The Confederate practice of moving artillery with individual units instead of in one mass in the difficult terrain surrounding Malvern Hill contributed to this issue. A potential solution to this problem lay with Brigadier General William N. Pendleton's 14 batteries in reserve.
Yeah, in reserve. Key, why don't you bring those up?
However, Lee's headquarters never contacted Pendleton, who spent July 1st awaiting events and orders in readiness for whatever service might be called for. Those orders never came, and Pendleton's batteries went unused.
Wow.
Magruder might also share in the blame. His late arrival to the battlefield.
That's not his fault. Whoever gave him the stupid map that hasn't the same map as his commander has.
It's true. It was caused by bad maps and faulty guides. Since Magruder received Chittend's draft late in the day and with no time attached to it, there was no way for him to determine the relevance of the order.
Right.
Burton suggests that Magruder cannot be reasonably blamed for his attacks on the Union line. He was responding to Lee's order and didn't initially try to form a unified attack to the Union.
Right.
He did. He was like, I'm going to try to get something going on here, boys.
Well, finally, Magruder was riding back and forth across the battlefield, making it difficult for him to be found by junior officers seeking guidance. Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah. Several other factors may have played into the Confederate repulse, including Theophilus Holmes's refusal to participate in the battle, dismissing any notion of actively engaging the
He knew. He was smart. He was like, dude, you see what's going on? They have a wide open range of everything we're doing here. We can't reach them.
How do you just refuse? He better not be on the Confederates no more.
Right.
Kick him out, release him, waiver him, put him on the waiver wire, and see if the Unions pick him up or something.
Fine him or something.
Lee's part of the Confederate defeat at Malvern Hill has been criticized by historians, though he put rested troops on the field and accepted Longstreet's suggestions, which did not commit him to a charge. Lee himself was not present on the battlefield to observe the fighting. Historian Stephen Sears points out that Lee's ineffective communication with his generals and apparent failure to write his own communications to his brigadier generals, instead leaving orders open to interpretation, may have contributed to the defeat.
Of course it did.
Lee could have also countermanded Chilton's orders when it became apparent they were fruitless, or verified the success, quote unquote, of Armistead, who was actually trapped down. Consequently, Lee must also share blame in the repeated lack of coordination of attacks throughout the day. You think he is the overall guy?
Yes, he should get all the blame. Despite the strength that Malvern Hill has demonstrated in the battle, McClellan felt he needed to continue with his planned withdrawal to Harrison's Landing. Right? To John Porter's chagrin. He's like, we shouldn't.
I was like, dude, did you see what we just did here? We could stay right here, call for more reinforcements or plan out something.
He's like, can you not tell this land is unfreaking attackable, bud? They cannot, from all sides.
Unless they bring up another 100,000.
And they do it all at once, but we're still taking out thousands of those guys. Porter felt the Army of Potomac should remain atop the hill or perhaps even continue their advance to Richmond. Yes.
Stupid. It was only a mile away, dude.
McClellan, however, insisted that Confederate troops greatly outnumbered his own. Felt he could not protect Harrison's Landing from his current position at Malvern Hill and feared being cut off from his supply depot. McClellan's mentality prevailed. Of course.
Well, he's the overall guy.
The Union batteries and McClellan's engineers began moving to Harrison's Landing soon after the end of the battle. Starting at about 11 p.m., they're like, we're not even sleeping here, boys. We're out. Within hours, nearly all of McClellan's Army of the Potomac was marching towards Harrison's Landing. Once the last of these men had crossed the Turkey Island Bridge, you know what they did? They destroyed that sumbitch, and they felled trees over it to stem any pursuit, leaving the James River between the Union and Confederate armies. There's our line right there, boys.
The areas around the hill hosted much of Lee's army the night after the battle.
Right.
Some of the Confederates were close enough to hear the sounds made by the Army of the Potomac retreating under cover of darkness and could see the Lanners and Northerners helping their wounded.
Oh, of course.
The day after the battle, Lee and Stonewall Jackson met President Jefferson Davis at Poindexter Farm. They considered immediately pursuing McClellan, but in view of the rain and confusion, Davis and Lee deemed large-scale pursuit of McClellan's army too risky. Jackson disagreed and said, they have not all got away if we immediately go after them. Right. Jackson even had the bodies of the dead moved, like parted them. So his soldiers had a clear line of attack when pursuing McClellan. However, Davis and Lee thought it necessary to rest.
I mean, true, too, though.
Right. Well, Jackson's a good example. He should know that.
Right.
He's like, I'm all rested now, boys.
Although Lee and President Davis did not completely rule out a pursuit, Lee ordered G.E.B. Stewart, which is Jeb.
J.E.B.
Yeah, G.E.B. Get it? I got a G.E.B. Lee ordered Jeb Stewart to reconnoiter McClellan's position for future attacks.
Yeah, they were going to.
Lee ordered General Holmes to move to Drury's Bluff and decided to keep the men on Malvern Hill through July.
So now they have the hill.
Right, I would stay there. Right.
Well, there's nobody to attack.
Right. He goes. He said, "You guys go."
Like, he got on top of the hill. He's like, "This is what it's like."
He's like, "Damn, no wonder why."
Right.
So he sent Holmes's on the hill. No, he decided to keep some men on Malvern Hill to the 3rd of July to forestall any potential Union attack against that.
Well, the Unions know what's happening. They ain't attacking that hill once you're on it.
It's Independence Day, 1862. General Lee's men began marching towards Harrison's Landing. He made his headquarters a few miles north of Evington Heights a 60-foot elevation approximately 13 miles from Harrison's Landing, stayed nearby with his army for several days, searching for weaknesses in the Union line at the heights that might allow for an attack. There was no weaknesses. That's why you think he was going to Harrison's Landing. No weaknesses presented itself, though. And then by the end of the 8th of July, the entire army in Northern Virginia, save for the cavalry stations and the picket forces, was back near Richmond. The Peninsula Campaign was over.
It's gone, done,
finished,
and nobody won. I guess the Confederates won because the Peninsula Campaign was designed to take over Richmond. So
right, and well, yeah.
Well, despite the defeat on Malvern Hill, the 7 days battles accomplished the original Confederate goal of removing any direct threat to Richmond from the Union Army.
They did.
The 3 newspapers in Richmond exulted in this strategic victory and lionized Robert E. Lee as a national hero.
Wow.
They said no captain that ever lived could have planned or executed a better plan, says the Richmond Dispatch.
Oh, no.
Similarly, Confederate Navy Secretary Stephen Mallory said, the great McClellan, the young Napoleon, now like a whipped cur, lies on the banks of the James River, crouched under his gunboats.
Well,
Well, he's not wrong about that. Throughout Richmond was the once beleaguered South. There was a triumphant mood, and scant attention was paid to the flaws in Lee's tactics or execution. Yeah,
oh, wow. These guys are getting fed a bunch of baloney.
Of course. Well, I mean, obviously, the North is doing the same thing.
Right, times war. Except
for
the North is mostly true.
Well, the North is not doing the same thing to McClellan.
No. Lee was not exultant, but deeply, bitterly disappointed.
I bet he had a chance to crumble the Union, or at least the Army of the Potomac right there, dude.
When he wrote his wife, he said, our success has not been as great or complete as we should have desired. In an official report, he also wrote, under ordinary circumstances, the Federal Army should have been destroyed.
Yeah.
He ain't lying. The North Carolinian D.H. Hill shared Lee's bitterness and wrote, blood of North Carolina poured like water. In a post-war article, he also wrote of the battle, was not war, it was murder. Well, it's suicide.
Yeah.
Lee did not distribute blame for the failure to reach his desired result, but there were repercussions. Several commanders were resigned, including Theophilus Holmes.
Yeah, he should have been gone since he refused to participate at all.
John Magruder actually did what he was supposed to do. He tried. And his army was reorganized into 2 wings under Stonewall Jackson and another under James Longstreet.
Wow.
I think they should have kept Magruder.
All because of Magruder got false smashed, dude.
Further, Confederate artillery would now be moved into battalion-sized units, which is decent, at the head of Confederate columns, which is actually good.
Well, there you go. In McClellan's case, his success on Malvern Hill was overshadowed by his overall defeat in the 7 days battles. Northern public met McClellan's defeat with despondency, and his reputation was tarnished. Some of McClellan's soldiers voiced their continued confidence in him, though. Such opinions were not unanimous. One of McClellan's engineers, Lieutenant William Falwell, wondered why they deify a general whose greatest feat has been a masterly retreat. Wow, that's some harsh words by Falwell. So this dude did nothing good but retreat.
Right.
Similar opinion was shared by many others in the rank and file of the Union military. Some in politics also abandoned the Democratic McClellan altogether. He was also accused of being on the Galena during the Battle of Malvern Hill.
Accused, he was.
And newspapers and tabloids around the country heaped scorn on him, especially when he ran for president against Lincoln in 1862.
Why would he even do that?
Well, because him and Lincoln hated each other.
Right. President Lincoln was also losing faith in McClellan.
He already did. 26th of June, 1862, the day of Lee's first offensive during 7 days. The Army of Virginia was formed and command given to Major General John Pope. Yep. Lincoln's like, we're going to try another guy going to try to take over Richmond. You're pretty much done here, McClellan.
Right. While McClellan was at Harrison's Landing, parts of his Army of the Potomac were continuously reassigned to Pope. Pope and his Army of Virginia left for Gordonsville, Virginia on July 14th, setting the stage for the subsequent Northern Virginia campaign. Yeah, this became West Virginia. And, In his Battle Pieces publication, Herman Melville penned a poem about the battle, titled with the same name as the hill on which it was fought.
Oh, good for him.
In the poem, Melville questions the elms of Malvern Hill of whether they recall the haggard beers of blood the day of the battle.
Well, if those trees could talk, right? A lot of them are still there. The battlefield at Malvern Hill is credited by the National Park Service as being the best preserved Civil War battlefield in Central or Southern Virginia.
No shit.
Most recent preservation efforts there have been the consequence, I don't think it's the right word, of cooperative efforts between Richmond National Battlefield Park and the American Battlefield Trust, formerly known as the Civil War Trust. The American Battlefield Trust and its land preservation partners have acquired and preserved 1,441 acres in more than 6 transactions from 94 to 2001. Its efforts have been bolstered by the Virginia Land Conservation Fund, the Association for Preservation of the Virginia Antiquities, and officials from Henrico County. Most of this track wraps around the intersection of Willis Church Road and Carter's Mill Road.
Most of this track wraps around the intersections. The land includes the starting point for the Confederate assaults on the day of the battle.
Good for him.
The Willis Church parsonage, the ruins of which remains visible today.
Oh, cool. Recent
preservation efforts include the acquisition of the Crew House in 2013. As of 2005, the National Park Service reported that 1,332.5 acres of land was protected on and around Malvern Hill to preserve the battlefield.
Good for them.
More land has been acquired and preserved since then by the American Battlefield Trust.
Cool.
Driving and walking tours, among other services, are offered at the site. August 2016, the 871-acre Malvern Hill farm was listed for sale at $10.6 million by descendants of William H. Ferguson Sr., who lived between the years of 1885 and 1984. Look at this guy. One hundo, almost.
Right.
It was purchased by a nonprofit Capital Region Land Conservancy in February of 2018 for $6.6 million.
You got a deal, huh?
A deal. It's not worth $6.6 million.
871 acres. Still farmland and stuff.
Yeah.
Not no more.
Maybe $2 million.
The CRLC subsequently recorded conservation easements to protect 465 acres with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources and 25 acres with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. Portions of the property were then gifted to Henrico County for the future site of an open space area for education and passive recreation, as well as the James River Association for a canoe and kayak launch into Turkey Island Creek, which flows into the James River at the Wildlife Refuge.
Damn right.
Capital Region Land Conservancy is holding the remaining 380 acres to be included into the National Park Service.